My name is Sandra Fritz. I'm the chairperson of the Shrewsbury School Committee, and welcome to our meeting of August 19th. Tonight's meeting is broadcast live on Selco channels 29 and 329, and it's also streamed live on Shrewsbury Media Connections website. I'd like to thank Executive Director Mark Serra and IT Director Brian LaRue for helping us with our meetings each and every week. I would just like to announce that Mr. Palich is attending by phone this evening. He did have a prior travel commitment, but he is with us via telephone. First on the agenda is public participation. And as you can see, we are back meeting in person. However, due to COVID restrictions, Town Hall is not open to the public. But if someone wishes to contact the committee and address us, you can certainly do that by phone. And you can email the committee at schoolcommittee@shrewsbury.k12.ma.us. We do have one individual who would like to address the committee this evening. It's Tim Shear. And Tim, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you guys.
Great. If you could just introduce yourself, your position, and your address for the record, and you can address the committee.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tim Shear, and I'm a social sciences teacher at Shrewsbury High School and one of the authors of a letter submitted to the school committee today. I wish to thank Chairperson Fritz, members of the school committee, Dr. Sawyer, and other leaders of the Shrewsbury Public Schools present here this evening for the opportunity to speak on behalf of a group of 125 SPS educators and community members who submitted this letter addressing our concerns about the district's reopening plan. We recognize that those involved in creating this plan have been hard at work and under a great deal of pressure with minimal guidance from the state throughout the summer, and we understand that some details are still being negotiated. However, it is our belief that the current plan is at best too incomplete to move forward with, and at worst, a potential catalyst for a public health disaster within our community. I would encourage everyone to read the full letter since it will be impossible for me to address all of its contents right now. While there is a litany of other concerns addressed in the letter, such as the lack of opportunity for meaningful public comment before its approval, dependent care, educational efficacy, and social and emotional well-being and mental health of our students and staff, in the interest of time, I will only address our most pressing concerns. Our primary concern with the plan is that it doesn't adequately protect the health and safety of school community stakeholders. We feel strongly that any kind of in-person reopening should be based on more global public health metrics, considering examples of schools in other countries that have reopened safely, and not just Shrewsbury standing within the state's recently unveiled map of recent new cases, or Massachusetts' relatively positive case trend compared to states in other regions of the country. The latest data shows Shrewsbury has not ended community spread of the virus, but rather appears to be part of an increasing trend. Even if Shrewsbury does manage to have no new cases before school opens, it is not an island, and we have educators and students who live in other towns and states who will be entering our buildings. This plan seems to disregard evidence that older children can spread the virus just as well as adults, and that younger children can carry higher loads of the virus than adults. The medical experts in the district webinar confirmed that children ages 10 through 19 are likely to spread the virus as much as adults. Yet this plan would allow children of those ages and our adult staff to be together indoors for greater lengths of time and in greater numbers than pretty much any other aspect of our society right now. This plan fails to break secondary school students into more isolated pods or use a, quote, week-on, week-off model, which would reduce the number of individuals that staff and students come into contact with at school during each week. As it stands right now, this plan exposes our secondary school staff and students, particularly classroom teachers, to hundreds of other people indoors per week. In addition, we are concerned about the lack of scientific consensus about how well younger students carry and spread the disease, and there will be staff working with these students for long periods of time in closed indoor spaces. The plan does not clearly and specifically address enough measures to mitigate aerosol spread of the virus. The plan gave only a vague assessment of school ventilation systems and seemed to suggest that the use of MERV 8 filters, which are designed to filter out large particles like concrete dust, and simply opening the windows at some schools constitutes appropriate ventilation. Our letter encourages the district to use the much higher standards put forth by the CDC and other respected bodies, which includes the addition of HEPA purifiers where necessary. The plan seems to acknowledge that people will get sick with COVID-19 if we move forward in this manner. We agree that this plan will result in people getting sick. and are concerned that this plan does not seriously take the potential long-term health effects of COVID-19 for those who recover into account, to say nothing of those who might die. I would encourage a full reading of the letter for more details on our concerns over health and safety. Our letter also offers some suggestions to help address these issues. Some ideas relevant to what I've discussed tonight. First, provide more opportunities for meaningful public feedback and more robust public dialogue for all stakeholders who are impacted by this reopening plan. Second, seriously reconsider a full remote start to the school year as part of a phased reopening until a safer plan. The district's preferred plan utilizes a hybrid model. We ask that more creative solutions be employed to create a hybrid environment that is truly low risk for both students and staff. We have outlined these ideas in more detail in the letter. When this plan was presented to the committee for approval, all of those at the meeting stated that health and safety was the #1 priority for reopening. While we believe this was sincere, we also believe that the approved plan must be altered in some areas and fully completed in others in order to honor that priority for those that make up our school community. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Tim, and I appreciate the fact that you wanted to address the committee this evening. And for anybody watching at home or listening, I just wanted to make it clear that the school committee is always ready and willing to listen. Our policy is anyone can approach us at any time. We put that out every meeting. Staff, students, everybody should feel comfortable approaching us. And I believe we had, during this planning process, we did have about 145 staff members who participated in planning and looking at what is the balanced risk and the best process for reopening schools. So we're going to take this letter into consideration. We will definitely go through it and take your comments in consideration, and we do respect the fact that you're coming to us this evening. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is chairperson and members report. Does anybody have anything? No, good. Oh, you do, Dale. Okay.
So I would just like to announce that we've released another episode of School Talk on cable. We addressed the issues of whether going straight to college after high school is the best path for everyone or what alternatives there may be. And so if you'd like an hour of tube time that does not involve the word COVID-19, I would encourage you to watch it.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the work that you do to produce all these shows. We do appreciate it. Everybody else, we're good? Okay, next is superintendent's report.
Thank you, Ms. Fritz. I just wanted to thank all the parents, family members last week who participated in the 3 webinars we held. We held them on 3 separate nights, one for each grade span level of the school district, early childhood, elementary, middle, and high school. We could tell from the stream, we typically had about 500 people on the actual Zoom call. We know from Shrewsbury Media Connection, and again, thanks to Mark Serra and his team for live broadcasting it on channels 29 and 329 and streaming it live on their site, as this meeting is now. There were another 500 or so on the streaming. We're not sure how many were watching on cable because we don't have those numbers, but so minimally about 1,000 people at least each of those webinars, and we appreciate people participating, sending in their questions. We captured all those questions in the Q&A documents and have been reviewing those. Along the same lines, people have been sending emails to the 2020 reopen at shrewsbury.k12.ma.us email address. We've had a flood of emails over the last couple of weeks, understandably so. We've tried to address those emails in the FAQ that we released last Friday afternoon. And there are more. There are some that are very specific. I ask people's grace and patience as we try to get back to individual specific questions that might have come in through that. Some of the more broad questions will be answered through the general presentations and FAQ documents that we produce as a result. But each one of those is logged and each one of them is read, and we utilize those to help in our ongoing planning. I also want to mention that we have 3 staff webinars scheduled for tomorrow, again with each of the 3 levels. And we're looking forward to having a similar process with our staff and looking forward to hearing more of their questions. We have hundreds of entries. We've had for well over a month, maybe even longer than that. We've had a Google form available for Shrewsbury Public Schools staff for their specific input about our reopening plan. We've had hundreds of entries that have been put into that, and those are things that we've been also utilizing in terms of trying to develop the reopening plan specifics that we have so far and those that we're continuing to develop. And then I just also want to mention that there is tomorrow that in addition to the administration, school committee members, some who are available with their schedules, will also be on those staff webinars so that you can also directly participate and see the questions that are being submitted by staff. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that this afternoon, about mid-afternoon, new updated guidance from the Department of Elementary Secondary Education and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health was released. I have not had a chance to actually even open the document yet, to be honest, but there is going to be some additional information and updates around some of the specifics as how they're expecting schools to work on issues related to COVID-19. And so we'll be reviewing that starting tomorrow and obviously responding to any changes in the guidance that have been created. One piece I know that's already hit the news is that the Department of Public Health is going to be mandating that students receive the influenza vaccine by the end of the calendar year in order to participate in school. My initial understanding is that that's to participate whether they participate in person or in a remote setting. In a public school, or I'm not sure about private, but certainly in a public school setting. And that's something new, and obviously the state is looking to address where there is a vaccine, and obviously there's a vaccine that is a little different every year we commonly don't call it a vaccine, but it's a flu shot, and that there's going to be an aggressive approach to making sure that we're inoculating our students and children in the Commonwealth, so that's a new piece of information as well. So we'll continue to absorb all the different guidance that's coming from the state and from local and state public health authorities, and we'll continue to adapt based on that information. When I make the presentation or the update later, I'll go over some data that was just released by the state today as well. And that's Superintendent's report this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Our first time scheduled appointment this evening is the approval of Gateways Academy to operate as a private school. In way of background, in order to educate students of compulsory school age 6 through 16 in Massachusetts, a private school, including a school with a religious affiliation, must obtain the approval of the school committee of the city or town in which the school is located. Gateways Academy began as an idea to serve families displaced by the closing of St. Mary's School in Worcester in June of 2020. Former employees of St. Mary's who comprise the administrative team have submitted documentation and a formal request to the committee for approval of a new microschool, namely Gateways Academy, to be located at 10 Stanley Road in Shrewsbury. And Dr. Sawyer will provide the information.
Thank you. There's a substantial amount of information in your packet this evening. I first want to thank and commend the individuals who are putting together this plan for this proposed private school: Cynthia Ahern, Monica Campbell, Cindy Sproul, and Stacy Varney. I had the opportunity a few weeks ago to have a phone conversation with Ms. Ahern, who serves as the principal and one of the educators at St. Mary's. She's a retired public school administrator from a district west of Worcester, and the dedication of these educators is commendable. Ms. Ahern and this group of educators were looking to, as you mentioned, provide an educational opportunity to replace the school that families were attending that was closed by the Worcester Diocese. And they have located a space here in Shrewsbury at the Grace Baptist Church where they'll be able to do that. And as of state law, the way state law exists, local school committees are responsible for approving any new private schools that open in their community. There was guidance from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education that I shared with the school committee in terms of the kinds of things that school committees should look for. And I believe that Ms. Ahern and her team have provided the sufficient information around the quality of the education that the school will provide. And as such, I do recommend that the school committee vote to approve this school. They're calling it a micro school. At this time, they have, I believe it's 19 students who they're confident will be enrolled, and they may receive some others. And I think one of the most remarkable things about their plan is that all of the educators for the coming year are actually going to volunteer their time for the entire year. They're not going to take any compensation whatsoever to help the school get it on its feet. They're going to be charging families a relatively low tuition of $5,000 per year, and they'll look to expand a bit year over year, but again, being a very small school operation. In terms of the state law and the state guidance, is that school committees may not unreasonably withhold approval, and as long as there is a reasonable expectation that the materials provided and information provided by those making application indicates that students who attend that school will get an education that would be comparable to that they could get in the public school district. Of course, many of the mandates that apply to public education don't apply to private schools, but they have provided documentation regarding their curriculum, regarding their approach, regarding how they'll be providing supports for students, and all of it, based on my review, meets a standard that I think it's very reasonable for the school committee to give their approval to this new school named Gateways Academy. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions from the committee based on that or any of the materials that are in your packet this evening.
Does anybody have any questions or comments? Jason, any question or comment?
All set.
Okay, we're good? Excellent. Okay, may I have a motion that the school committee authorize Gateways Academy to operate as a private school offering grades kindergarten through 12 in Shrewsbury?
So moved.
Second.
And a roll call vote's required because Jason's online. So Mr. Palich?
Aye.
Ms. Heffernan?
Aye.
Dr. McGee?
Aye.
Mr. Wensky?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Motion carries unanimously. Okay, next on the agenda, we are going to have an update on the reopening plan for 2020-2021 school year. As you know, the school committee voted on August 6th to approve the superintendent's recommended plan, and he and district administrators will provide an update since last week.
Thank you, Ms. Fritz. So there's a slide deck we'll go through. Happy to provide this update to you this evening. As we have begun every one of our presentations in recent weeks, I want to share again the three messages that indeed the health and well-being of our students and families and staff is our first priority, that our focus for the coming school year is to develop a safe school environment, both for our students and our staff, that prioritizes everyone's well-being and enables high levels of learning for all of our students. We are planning based on guidance from the state, from the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and as well as medical experts and public health officials, as well as looking at the evolving data regarding the pandemic, both across the state in Massachusetts, locally, and in Shrewsbury. I wanted to share a couple of slides that shared last week, but this is updated data because the various websites will update it as different information comes in day over day and week over week. This slide indicates from the Johns Hopkins University's Coronavirus Resource Center that they provide an approach that has a 7-day positivity rate for each of the states across the country. The Massachusetts 7-day rate is now listed at 2.06% as of their latest data. That's live on their website right now, and the link is right there for people who are interested. Massachusetts has actually moved closer to the bottom of the states compared to when I shared this data with you at the last meeting 2 weeks ago. And we're very pleased that we remain in the green and below the World Health Organization benchmark of 5%. I know I was able to watch Dr. Fauci on a recent interview he was part of, and again, he was mentioning that 5% benchmark, that if states or regions are below that 5% benchmark, that is when they should be considering, with mitigating factors, of course, and taking precautions, such as masks and distancing, reopening as far as whether those are schools or other parts of the community. But again, it's good news in terms of where Massachusetts remains standing on the 7-day positivity rate. This next slide indicates the new metric that the state started putting out a couple of weeks ago. And this is over a 14-day average of cases per 100,000 people. That number now for Shrewsbury is 1.5. We remain a community that's shaded in green, where there are fewer than 4 cases per 100,000. This report just came out this afternoon from the state, and honestly, I haven't had a chance to compare it to the last week's version. But I believe that number, in terms of the number of cases, is down compared to what it was when they first reported this statistic. Communities that are in the green are in yellow and red, green and white, are considered to be obviously safer in terms of risk of community spread when you're working on issues relative to reopening schools or other elements. So I wanted to report that latest information there. Also, this next slide looks at the 14-day positive test rate. This is also state data that they report on a week-by-week basis, on a weekly report. 2 weeks ago, that number was 1.23% for Shrewsbury. Last week, it was 1% exactly. And this week, it's been reduced by another 0.25% down to 0.72%. That was just released this afternoon by the state. Obviously, that's the trend we want to see, and that's important. At the same time, if you can toggle back to the previous slide for a moment, it's important to note, and we have been looking at the rates in communities that are surrounding Shrewsbury as well. Obviously, Worcester, a little to our west, has been in the yellow since they released this and remains that way. To our east, Westboro has changed into the yellow so that it has between 4 and 8 cases per 100,000. That bears watching, of course. The communities to our north actually have fewer than 5 reported cases in total in their community, including the communities to our south is the same way. So we'll continue to look at that. Fortunately, in central Massachusetts, there are no communities that are labeled in the red zone with greater than 8 cases per 100,000. And this is, again, something we've been doing all along. We'll continue to monitor the data as it comes in. If you could advance 2 slides, please. I did, as promised, wanted to update the community and the staff who are watching with regard to what the initial choices have been for families in terms of choosing an educational program under our reopening plan. They had the opportunity to choose either an all-remote plan for their children, where they would not come into school physically at all, or the hybrid plan, where students would attend 2 days a week typically and work remotely for the rest of the week. You can see this list, which I pulled just before this meeting out of our PowerSchool student information system. The first line actually means out of district or walk-ins, and I think you can discount that. That's really a group. Many of those students go to other schools and receive some special education services from us on a walk-in basis, but it is a category that's just captured within that table. But if you look at all the 9 schools, you can see, and this is based on the numbers who have made choices. Where it says none, those are people who have not given us a choice yet. I did send out another automated call and email and text earlier today, asking families to make their decision by 3 o'clock today. Otherwise, what we will be doing is taking those students and entering them in the hybrid program. That typically, for the most part across the district, is where parents are choosing. And it's easier for us to plan for them to be in the hybrid program, and then if a family changes their mind, pull them out, then it would be the opposite. So we indicated if they haven't made a choice, we will place them in the hybrid program. But you can see the vast majority, about 90% of our families have made a choice for their child, and you can see the numbers here on a pure number basis. But on this next slide, it's a little bit easier to look on a percentage basis. So you'll see that in terms of, these are from families who have made a choice, the percentage of students. At Shrewsbury High School, 20% of our students have chosen, and I apologize that the headings of those columns are wrong, so we have to reverse those, and that's my error, and I apologize for that. So just switch the titles around, and we'll fix that when we put this online after the meeting tomorrow. But 20% of our students at Shrewsbury High School have chosen all remote, and 80% are choosing the hybrid in-person model. You can see for Sherwood Middle School at 36%, and if you jump down to Oak Middle School at 32%, roughly a third, or a little more than a third, are choosing the all remote, and about 2/3 choosing to attend in person at the middle school level. At the elementary level, we have an interesting difference among some of our elementary school communities. If you look at Spring Street School and Patton School, at about a quarter of the families choosing to all remote, and about 3/4 choosing to have their students attend the hybrid model. If you look at Coolidge School, it's a much higher percentage of students choosing all remote at 42%. And if you look at Floral Street School, it's actually a majority of the students, families chose the all remote, 52% versus 48% choosing hybrid. Then after that, you can see that at the early childhood level, slight majority at Beale choosing all remote instead of hybrid. And at Parker Road Preschool, 46%, so almost half, choosing the all remote. This is based on our initial surveying of the community, a little higher percentage of students choosing all remote than we expected. A lot of the undecided, more broke that way than we expected them to. We're using this data right now, and our team has been working furiously this week to try to distribute the students across different kinds of class sections. One of the first decisions we need to make is what kind of cohort D experience, cohort D are the students who choose all remote, and whether we'll be able to provide them with a Shrewsbury educator teaching an all remote class cohort of students. Based on the percentages, it is looking that at the elementary level, we'll be able to provide Shrewsbury teachers teaching cohorts of those students. At the middle school level, we're looking at how that would break across teams, because at Oak Middle School, for example, about 20% of our students in each grade level are on one team, 5 teams of about 100 students each. The numbers aren't nice and neat for us, so we have to look at how we're going to resolve that. At Sherwood with 2-person teams, it's a little more flexible in terms of setting those up. But it's looking like we'll be able to utilize Shrewsbury educators to provide those, with the exception perhaps of some very specific courses, particularly in the area perhaps of foreign language. We might need to use a third-party solution maybe for that subject. At the high school level, it is much more complicated for sure. Looking at what we have in place, we have with 20% of the students, but distributed across 250 unique courses. It isn't as if they break down into nice, neat cohorts of students who have the same schedule. So it is much more likely we'll need to utilize some sort of third-party solution for the high school. We're looking at all the different permutations of what that looks like right now, and we'll be able to provide some more concrete information to the school community next week in terms of what that will look like. So when we report back at the meeting a week from tonight, we expect to have some more specifics around how we will accomplish providing the chosen program for these families. And then families will be able to make another final choice for the start of the school year. Because as we've indicated, this was an initial choice, and once we can provide more information based on our planning that's based on these initial choices, families will have a chance to change their mind if they wish before school starts. And then even after school starts, they will have a chance to change their mind again at some point if they'd like to. We typically will have a longer waiting period once the school year begins, however, in order to make those switches effectively. Up to as much as 30 days is what we're assuming right now could be the case, although we'll try to do it as quickly as we can, of course. So that's some of the data that we have regarding the initial choices that folks have made. The next piece is something that we've had a lot of questions about from both our staff as well as our families, and that is the fact that people are obviously focused on information relative to air exchange and HVAC, and that's something that we'll be addressing more tomorrow in our staff webinars, and we'll be providing, right now the town Department of Public Buildings, Division of Public Buildings is having a third-party experts go through and do an assessment of all of our systems. Their report, once it's complete, will be made public. But we do have, for the exception of Beale School, all of our schools do have some kind of ventilation system. And as we mentioned at our meeting previously, we will be providing a ventilation system that will be added to Beale, a temporary system essentially that will provide air turnover and actually some climate control as well to the Beale School. Right now, we're in a situation where some of our schools have a climate control aspect to their HVAC system. That includes our newest school, Sherwood Middle School. That also includes Parker Road Preschool as well. And then the 2 schools that had their HVAC systems renovated in recent years, Patton School and Spring Street School, Those 4 of our 9 schools have climate control. The other 5 do not, other than specific spaces that are used throughout the year, such as the media center, office wing, et cetera. But in terms of the general classroom spaces, they're typically not climate controlled for heat. We have had increasingly, over the last number of years, some very hot weather that we've had to endure during the month of September in particular, when we open school. The fact that we're opening later this year and going to be delaying the start of school to September 15th, hopefully will mitigate that to some extent. But we know we can still have very hot weather, and I'm not an expert on climate change, but obviously some of the temperature extremes that are happening, it's certainly been noticeable to us that we've been having warmer heat spells during the fall months, especially in the early fall. In addition to sometimes we tend to get those in late June as well. In terms of the questions we've been receiving, is that we have had some real concerns about some of the, and we do have a heat plan to address when we have more extreme temperatures, where particularly we have areas where on the top floor or a side that may be exposed to the sun, where we need to have students and staff, cycle out of those classrooms into some of those air-conditioned spaces that might be available. For example, teach in a shady area outside, and whether we try to find ways to mitigate that. However, a number of people have asked about the issue wearing masks this fall, coming back to school in person, and some of the discomfort that might create in addition to the normal discomfort. We're concerned about that as well. So what you see on the slide here is the National Weather Service's heat index, where you see they have a combination, and they have a formula essentially that combines the relative humidity with the temperature. There's an area where they suggest you use caution, then extreme caution, danger, and extreme danger. What I am working on, and do not have all the very specific language ready for tonight, but I wanted to let the school community know, the school committee as well as the school community know, that my intention is to put together a benchmark where I would consider, much as I would on an inclement weather day in the winter, if I determine that it's not, that there is too much risk about people driving to school, and being able to remove snow to have exits, free of snow and so forth, what we would call a snow day, or a delayed opening to make sure we're in a position to open more safely. Similarly, I'll be taking an approach where if the weather forecast looks like it's going to be pushing into the what here is the orange, light orange extreme caution area, that depending on the time of day that's predicted to happen, that we might be looking at an early release, or potentially a no school day or no in-person school day. One of the pieces, of course, as we mentioned around snow days, with the remote learning capacity we've developed as a result of the pandemic, it would be likely that would still be considered to be a day of school, and we'd be asking students to learn remotely on those days and our staff to teach remotely, other than those who may be coming into the spaces potentially that are climate controlled. But this is likely just due to family issues and older students watching younger students, something we'd probably do on a whole district basis for simplification. So I'll be putting that together and releasing that information once I have the specific language. But because a number of people have been asking that question, I did want to present that information this evening, that we think this is something. And, certainly what I'd like to see Sunday before I retire is that all 9 of our schools are climate controlled and we don't have to worry about this. And given the way weather patterns have been changing, that's something that the town, and that's something we have communicated, formally in writing to the town manager in terms of our long-term capital planning for schools is something we would like to see. We'll have the benefit next year of the brand-new Beal School coming online, which will be climate-controlled as well, so that will be a good move in the right direction. But I believe we do need to address the other schools, and that will not be without considerable expense. But hopefully that's the kind of thing that over time, the state and the federal government are supporting in some way as well in terms of improving school infrastructure, especially given some of these challenges and the focus on HVAC that the pandemic is bringing about as well. So that's something I wanted to share with the community tonight. And for the rest of our update this evening, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Belcito and Ms. Freeman. Meg Belcito, who is our Assistant Superintendent for Student Services, and then Noelle Freeman, our Director of School Nursing, who will talk about our very successful extended year program that just ended last week. So if you go to the next slide, I'll turn it over to Ms. Belcito.
So actually, if you don't take a look at some happy moments from our extended school year program this year, from our youngest children to some of our oldest. And also in the top right corner, you see Dr. Sawyer being able to greet one of our first students coming back for in-person services. So as Dr. Sawyer just said, we just finished our 6-week program from July 6th to August 13th. You can go to the next slide, thank you. And our first 2 weeks were remote services, and then we did 4 weeks or 16 days of in-person services, while we had some students that also stayed remote. We had 250 students in Shrewsbury qualify for summer services. 117 of these students were recommended for in-person services. 78 students came in for in-person services, our high-need students, or what in our reopening plan we're referring to as our cohort A students. 172 of our students stayed remote. Our related service providers were remote as well. And the reason for that, due to space capacity within the regulations for reopening for our summer services, the Department of Education had given us specific guidelines as to how many students could be in a classroom with the adults. Therefore, between our high-need students, the very dedicated ABA technicians, the ELC coordinators, the other staff, our nurse, all of those pieces put together, that had us take all of related services, occupational therapy, speech and language, PT, and we had them provide those services remotely for our students. We had 96 dedicated staff members in person for the dedicated time for in-person. Noelle is going to just briefly talk about some health statistics during that time.
Thanks, Meg. So as Meg said, I am going to briefly provide some statistics from the ESY Health Office, but first I'd like to thank Michelle Rogers, who was the school nurse for the ESY program and is one of our Shrewsbury High School nurses. I need to thank her not only for tracking and compiling the information that I'm sharing this evening, but also for her excellent care of the ESY students and staff throughout the 4-week in-person program. Her willingness and ability to partner with me and with the program staff as we navigated through this new health office environment was very much appreciated. I'd also like to preface this by saying that all staff and families involved in the program were required to do an at-home health screening each day. That was described in the report of our reopening plans a couple weeks ago. Staying home if sick was emphasized for both staff and students, and everyone's cooperation was key to our successful return. So I'd like to thank all of the staff and the families for that. So looking at our numbers, overall there were 42 visits to the health office by staff or students. In addition, of course, Michelle was in constant communication by email and phone with both staff and families to monitor illness and results of testing and the like. Of those 42 visits, 4 students were dismissed for possible COVID-19 symptoms. 6 were dismissed for other reasons, and just 1 student was called in sick and stayed home with possible symptoms. 3 of the students who had symptoms were tested for COVID-19, and all of them tested negative. The students who were dismissed with symptoms and not tested were able to return to school after evaluation by a healthcare provider who gave an alternate diagnosis to explain their symptoms. 7 staff were tested, 5 for symptoms, and 2 for close contact with a positive case, which happened outside of school in both cases. And again, all of the staff that were tested tested negative. Anyone who was tested, of course, followed our protocol, which requires being at home until the test results are available, and then providing proof of the negative test result in order to return to school. So there's no doubt that our need to consider this list of symptoms, many of which are so common, combined with the waiting for test results, can cause some feelings of uncertainty and even anxiety. However, these statistics are reassuring to us in regards to our plans for a larger scale in-person return to school next month.
So that is our update this evening. I would be happy to take any questions that the committee has.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? I'm going to start with Jason, just so you can hear us. Any questions or comments?
Just a brief comment, well, 2 brief comments. I want to thank Dr. Sawyer and his team for their continued work on reopening. Obviously, despite us having voted on the plan last week, obviously everybody understands this is a process that continues to evolve on a day-by-day basis, and this is the rare time where almost every day seems to involve major judgment calls. So I just really want to commend our leadership team, as I have in the past, for their continued work. I also just want to thank members of the community. Obviously, we as school committee members continue to see questions coming in via email. We continue to see discussion going on via social media. I know that there are questions out there, and I want to highlight what the superintendent mentioned earlier. I just would appreciate certainly everyone's grace and patience as our team does the best that they can to answer these questions as quickly as possible. I think that I've never seen a school district, let alone our school district, have to face challenges of this magnitude, but I continue to be impressed with the level of professionalism and the good judgment being exercised by our leadership team. So thank you to everyone involved.
Thank you, Jason. Anyone else have any comments or questions? John?
Yeah, just like to add to that, and thank you to all of the staff and leadership for all the time that you've been putting in. Every day is a new adventure. I know Sandy and I certainly spent about 6 hours on Tuesday just on various calls. So I really appreciate all the work that's been going into this. Dr. Sawyer, I'm curious if you can give us high-level context on some of the scheduling challenges that we might see, especially at the high school. More for context for the public, for those that have students at the high school, there's so many classes, that students select from. I'm just curious with that 80-20 split, what you see as, some of the challenges, going into now trying to schedule the students that have selected for hybrid versus those that are going to stay.
Well, in terms of the easier part, certainly is the students who are selecting hybrid, because, we're trying to give them the courses that they signed up for. It's just a question of splitting them across. And one thing I should have mentioned earlier, is that, we're dividing students by alphabet. Based on, and that's why we've been trying to get all of our parents to give us a decision, because based on the choices, where that might split. I know the last time they ran the stats, it was somewhere in the middle of the L's, where that sort of 50-50 roughly split was happening. We are going to have to do some balancing around things like special education students, who, make sure we're balancing caseloads across the two cohorts, for example, as well. We might be doing some balancing with students who don't have other family members, so it doesn't become a childcare issue or a scheduling issue for families. So that's pretty complicated behind the scenes. But at the same time, if there's a number of students who are taking a freshman English class, and that class maybe typically would have had, let's say, 24 kids in the class, and let's say that 20 of them have selected hybrid, then we'd be splitting them 10 and 10 across the two cohorts B and C. But then the really challenging part is now we have these 4 students who need freshman English. Now, freshman English is something everybody takes, so they may be able to combine with some other groups into something that could be taught potentially by a Shrewsbury teacher. But at the same time, you start combining that with, of those, let's say, across the freshman class, let's say there was one cohort of 24 kids who needed to get their English class online. But of those 24 kids, maybe 3 of them are in a choir, maybe 3 of them are taking an engineering elective, they're taking 3 different math courses, they're taking, 3 different science courses. It doesn't, split out very neatly. So there's literally, I would imagine probably millions of permutations of what a student schedule could look like, or a combination of student schedules could look like across different classes. Which is why, again, we maybe needed to look at a pretty high degree of a third-party solution at the high school level. That's not because, we obviously it's our obligation to provide them with the best educational opportunity we can under the circumstances. But it's with the number of percentage that are choosing hybrid, unlike at the elementary level where it looks like we'll be able to, assign a certain number of teachers to just teach remote cohorts of kids, as opposed to those who would be teaching kids in person. It looks like we'll need virtually all of our high school staff to be teaching the kids who are there in person. at reduced numbers because of the alternating schedule. So again, it's a tough nut to crack for sure, and we'll do our best to see what's possible. We're gonna make sure those kids still have connections with the high school, of course, with their counselor. And there may be, our hope would be to have someone from Shrewsbury Public Schools who would be their liaison to their learning program to make sure that they're making the kind of progress they should through it. But it's going to feel like a different experience, obviously, than if you're in school working directly with teachers and then doing remote learning assigned by them on the days that they're not there. So that's a bit of an overview, I guess, from our perspective.
No, I appreciate the context, and I just think it's important for everybody to understand the complexities around what we're doing here, because year over year, we see the challenges just on a normal year of how you schedule high school students and try to get them, whatever their desired choices are. This is completely different and uncharted territory, so thank you.
Anyone else? Dale?
Question for Ms. Friedman. How did the students do with regard to wearing masks? How did that come off?
They actually did quite well. This is a group that we had, expectations of having trouble with this particular group of students and compliance with masks, but with a few exceptions of some of the students there, turned 3 in the last couple of months. So some of those very young students and, some with more significant autism and behavioral challenges. There were a few students who were unable to wear masks, but the large majority did wear masks. We have face shields available as an option for students who cannot wear masks and for the staff who are working with the students who cannot wear masks. So we were actually very pleased with the compliance there.
It's, for what it's worth, I think it was very reassuring that you had no positives. It also was reassuring to me to see how you went through reporting everything to let us know that there's a certain level of vigilance that is occurring with regard to this. But I think it's also worth emphasizing, at least from some of the comments that I've heard, that some people feel that if there's a student in school that's positive, that you shut the building down, that the system has failed and the like. But the reason for the masks, the reason for the distancing is to build a system that can withstand positive students. You're not wearing masks because all the students are negative. You're wearing masks because somebody could come in who is positive, and you want the system to be able to withstand that. And it also is worth reporting to the public that in several studies that have looked at hospitals that are full of COVID-positive patients, that the incidence of COVID-positive employees is essentially the same as that in their community, and that it does not appear that they were getting the disease within the institution, even when they were providing direct care to COVID-positive patients, so that the system of distancing, the system of wearing masks seems to work quite well. And I would try to highlight that because I hope it provides some reassurance. We're building a system anticipating that there will be an occasional positive student or employee, and prior to their developing symptoms and being removed from the building, people should be safe anyway.
Perfect. Lindsay?
Thank you. As my other colleagues have mentioned, I certainly want to commend this leadership team and the community for their patience as we work through the complexities here. I think following what's going on social media and the comments that I've had with parents and kids in the district and employees in the district, we are balancing so many competing interests, from working parents in the district who are working in essential roles and essential services, to the stress and anxiety for our employees who carry concerns for themselves, their families, our students. And ultimately at the heart of our decision making is primarily the focus on delivering the most complete education to our students that we can in a safe way, because we know that they missed out on valuable learning during the spring, and figuring out how to get us back there. I continue to be supportive of our approach for our hybrid model, knowing that lots is happening in the media every day, and let's acknowledge that reality, and that's out there. But I am really also very pleased that we have a remote option for families who feel that they want to take that, and it's interesting to see the breakdown, and now we have the juggle of how to make that work. I do have two questions. When it comes to and this is a little bit to Nicole, but also maybe at the state level on guidance. The issue of testing we know is really important to be able to do this in as safe a way as possible. In the summertime, when you had a very small sample, but when you had those staff and students who needed to get testing, I'm just wondering about the relationships that we need to foster between the private providers of healthcare, the Department of Public Health, our offices, and how are we developing good communication streams such that you're getting information as quickly as you can in the health office to be able to make some important decisions.
So there's a lot of collaboration between, as far as getting test results back, between the Department of Public Health in Worcester and myself and the other school nurses. We just had a meeting this week with the Public Health Alliance around just that and talking about testing and what all the contacts are and who will be in touch with who and how we need to work together. And kind of split up the contact tracing and all of that. So that is well established. We are also, Dr. Gibson and I are working with pediatricians in the community to kind of make sure we're all on the same page about what is going to need to happen as far as testing or an alternative diagnosis for students who do exhibit symptoms and need either testing or other documentation from a healthcare provider to come back to school. So those lines of communication are also open. There are still limited test sites. That's a question that I asked the Department of Public Health, kind of what they're hearing from the state level about the availability of testing. Right now there are some test sites open in Worcester that are at this point have been extended through the middle of September, and there's hope that those, if needed, those sites will be extended again for free testing. But there is at this point sometimes a long wait in line to get tested, and I think that's something that the community as a whole really needs to kind of help push for and advocate for. We are working on that.
Okay. Thank you for the update at the state level too. On maybe a lighter side of all of this, some people might have seen in the media yesterday there was some release about sports and what sports might look like, and so I'm just wondering our schedule, amongst all the things we have to think about, but the sports are important. My young person really wants to play. I wonder if that would be on an agenda in upcoming weeks that we think we'd hear more guidance, and if there are many of our young people and their parents love the athletics. Do you have a sense, Dr. Sawyer, when you might have a chance to breathe and think about what that might look like for us?
Sure, and I certainly want to thank Mr. Jay Costa, who's our athletic director, who has been working with his fellow athletic directors, and he's a leader, and he's actually the president of his association at this point, I believe, as well, in making a variety of suggestions up to the state level on what the approach could be. I should have mentioned this in my update, and we received this information just last night, as a matter of fact. And the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, in combination with the state government in terms of the sort of overall safety element, they've made some decisions about what would be allowed and not allowed in the coming fall. I don't have it in front of me. The big news you may have seen in the newspapers is that a couple of sports, one football being included, would not be allowed to compete this fall. They would be allowed to practice as a team following very specific guidelines with its approach with distancing and so forth. Along with, I know, unified basketball would also be allowed to practice only, no games this fall. And there was one more sport, I forget which one it is, that would only be allowed to practice, with some others being allowed to actually compete. I know among those were cross country, field hockey, I believe volleyball or girls volleyball, but there may be some modifications, and that's something that has not been determined yet. The MIAA, which is the governing body of interscholastic sports in high schools and middle schools in Massachusetts, is probably going to have some modifications to some of those competition rules as well. So we just received this guidance and some directives. I believe that if we are back in a hybrid model, it is reasonable for our students to participate in ways, and of course lots of our young people in the community are participating in athletics right now, as we speak, based on the state guidance. And so, that's something that we know it's an important program, and we certainly, once we have more specific information from the MIAA, we can provide more details to the school committee.
Thank you. Before I make a comment about the reopening, with the reopening, when Mr. Scheer presented his letter to the school committee and spoke with us, I neglected to say that the letter that they sent to the school committee will be part of the public record and attached to our minutes, so anybody who wishes to review it will be able to do so through our minutes as well. I meant to say that earlier. And I just wanted to, again, thank Dr. Sawyer and staff. I know we keep repeating it, but it bears repeating multiple times. This project management that's going on with trying to reopen schools, the magnitude of details is amazing. And we are very close to it, so we are seeing it, but I want the public to really understand that there's so much going on. Everybody's doing the best job that they can with the best interest and intent for the students, teachers, families, and, we're gonna move through this together, and as things change, we're gonna keep updating everybody, but, we are going to get closer where there's gonna be more details so families and staff can plan how they're going to react to the reopening and what their schedules will be like and so forth. But I just think it bears repeating, the magnitude is amazing, and the amount of work the people in this room and the rest of the staff are doing is above and beyond. So thank you so much. We're going to get through this, and thank you for the updates. I think it's helpful for the public, and the webinars tomorrow for staff. We're just going to keep moving through this, so thank you. Next on the agenda, we are going to talk about the allowance for Shrewsbury Public School employees to attend school in person to assist with workforce stability. And just as background, we are hearing a lot about childcare issues for staff. And it's a major issue for returning to school for some of them due to various permutations of reopening plans in their own local school districts, and with remote or hybrid programs requiring supervision of school-age children who otherwise would be in school while their parents are working here in Shrewsbury. One way to provide some childcare relief for our staff who live in Shrewsbury and have children enrolled in our schools is to allow their children to attend more frequently in person. The Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education has encouraged this and may issue some guidance from the state level. At this time, Dr. Sawyer is going to talk about a potential recommendation for the committee to consider and have a potential vote. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fritz. I know Ms. Malone spoke to this at our last meeting, and one of the other complicating factors right now that we're working through, of course, is that there are a variety of staff who have issues that may complicate their ability to serve in their role in this coming year. That may be because of a health issue that a staff member has, and we're going to be providing reasonable accommodations to those staff. And in some cases, those staff would be able to, if they're a teacher or provide services, they may be able to do that remotely to students who are in cohort D who are learning remotely, and that could be a good match for that need that those staff have. But as you mentioned, one of the biggest obstacles that all working families are experiencing is the situation because school, and I think people recognize and people understand and recognize that the primary responsibility and reason for schools is to educate children. But it certainly, obviously serves an extremely important societal function of having a safe place for students to go during the work week, which allows parents to work and not be concerned about childcare. That is one of the biggest challenges that families face during the pandemic and that we faced certainly last spring. In terms of, and we know certainly, and you just reading news reports, that many organizations, private and public, are doing things to try to provide and assist their employees with childcare issues. And as an organization that has a mission and a responsibility to carry out certain tasks, that applies to us as well, of course. I would want to, I think it's important to mention, of course, that if, right now I would not call it a staffing crisis, but we have a significant challenge. Because if we do have staff members who, because of their childcare needs, are not able and choose to take advantage of what the federal law does allow right now, which is to take a leave for the purpose of childcare. That is something that will put us in a very difficult position that can affect many students by not being able to have a teacher who would have otherwise been assigned to them. And right now, it is very difficult to find substitutes. We're working hard to do that, but so is every other school district across the Commonwealth. And so people who are qualified and willing to substitute are in short supply. So one thing I want to be very clear about for those watching is that this is not a request that our staff made. As you mentioned in the introduction, Ms. Fritz, this is something that the Commissioner of Education, Elementary and Secondary Education, Jeff Riley, has made this suggestion on multiple occasions to superintendents. He indicated on a conference call today, as a matter of fact, that he may be issuing some written guidance or suggestions about ways school districts might be able to assist with this, because this is a statewide issue for sure. In terms of what this how this may be perceived by some, and I can certainly understand this, because there are a variety of workers who don't have a choice about working from home or being able to access childcare, especially our frontline workers in a variety of roles. One key difference, of course, is that many of the frontline workers, particularly those working in the medical field, when the pandemic hit, the governor declared that they were essential workers, and the state opened emergency child care centers across the Commonwealth. Our staff do not have access to that emergency child care. And it would certainly be a positive development if somehow there were additional opportunities for educators who are providing, in my opinion, an essential service to be able to access those kinds of things if they were made available. But that is not the reality we're dealing with at this time. And so one small way that I believe we might be able to avoid moving into more of a staffing crisis is to at least provide those staff who work for us and who live here in the town of Shrewsbury and have students who are enrolled in our school district to be able to have their children who, if they're attending an in-person model, instead of just 2 days a week, that they be able to attend either 4 days a week or potentially even 4.5 days a week. My recommendation would be to limit this to children in grades kindergarten through grade 6. That is a match for our extended school care. I believe that our upper middle school students and high school students are certainly better able to be left home. Obviously, those are family choices, but that's why we don't provide extended school care. We actually tried it at Oak Middle School once. We just didn't have the demand because families didn't feel it was necessary. There weren't enough families. It was a very small number of families who wanted to have their children in extended school care at that age. As far as our preschool program, that is considered something, especially the state, that we want to try to provide as much preschool seats for preschool students as we can who are enrolled with us and it's typically an alternating cycle anyways, and I'm not sure we'd have the room. And so one thing, and I did send an updated version of what I had sent to the committee earlier, because this is all, this is contingent upon space. We need to make sure we're serving as we already have. We've invited our most high-need students to be part of our so-called cohort A. We are looking at what the next level of need we might be able to accommodate. But again, we're going to have a lot of students whose education is compromised if we can't adequately staff our schools. That's a problem that is going to be very significant for us to resolve if we cannot find some ways to abate some of the child care situation. So with that, although I'm sure with some may disagree, and I understand that and respect that, at this time, for the benefit of our organization, ability to serve the students we need to serve with qualified staff, I am recommending to the school committee that you authorize me where there's space available to allow children of our employees who are enrolled in Shrewsbury Public Schools because they live here in town, again in kindergarten through grade 6, to be able to attend school in person more frequently for either 4 or 4.5 days in order to promote that workforce stability during this pandemic. I would also ask that if you were to vote this, that you allow me to make case-by-case exceptions outside of that age range. For example, there could be an older student who has a significant disability who would not be able to be home on their own, that would essentially qualify similarly to a younger student. I don't know if there'll be any such cases, and at this time, Ms. Malone has indicated to me that of the staff who have contacted her about having childcare issues, it is a relatively small number, or who are actually Shrewsbury Public Schools families. And that is something that, it will remain to be seen, obviously, if the school committee is willing to provide this authorization. We'll be reaching out to our staff and we'll be seeing, but we believe it's a manageable number that will not compromise our ability to provide what we need to provide to all of our students. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the recommendation and whether the school committee wants to authorize that this evening or give it consideration and do it at a subsequent meeting. It's certainly, again, one more piece of the puzzle that we're trying to put together under very difficult and unpredictable conditions relative to workforce planning.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. I'm going to start with Jason again. Any questions or comments?
Just a comment that I am supportive of the recommendation. I do understand that this is in some ways a controversial measure. I know that we've already received some feedback to the extent of, there are other frontline workers who don't have access to this service. While I do understand the concern, that is not within our span of control. What's within our span of control is our own staff. And my feeling is we're asking a lot of our staff in very scary and uncertain times. And if there's something we have the capacity to do for them to improve their transition back into the classroom, I'd like to do it. So I am in support of the recommendation.
Thank you, Jason. Any other comments or questions? Lindsay?
I find this one tricky, and first of all, I completely support the philosophy that we want to support our staff as much as they can to come back. And childcare, we know, is a huge obstacle for everybody right now. And I also appreciate that we're getting some guidance from DESE, but it's incomplete at this point in time, and that many of our educators don't even live in our district yet have children. And so how do we think about this on a holistic level, because our community does not have gates around it. I would really love to know, I understand it's a small number, but I think the complexity here and thinking about some of the equity issues of how many staff will we think would be supported by this, how many have children in the district and this school age, how many might have already chosen remote learning for their kids because of their own concerns about safety, in which case this isn't solving a different problem that they might have because they weren't intending to send their kids back to school. And then when I think about the issue of equity, I could see it from two different framing. One, from a sort of a parent point of view, almost a pivoting of teachers as a version of essential personnel versus other essential personnel. And then for the employees, how is it for those that we're offering a benefit around what is perceived as childcare, but only if you live in the district? And if you live in Worcester or you live in West Boylston, that is obviously not something we can offer. Not through any fault of our own, it's just not an opportunity for us. And so and yet at the backstop, I certainly agree with Mr. Palage, staffing our schools is essential. And so I would personally love a little more data and to understand what this is, but I want to sort of defer to the superintendent about in the scaffolding of decisions that must get made, how important is it that this one get made this evening to help the other decisions? Because if there's one thing we learned about COVID, there's no one decision, that many others that come from it. So that's the balance for me.
I mean, in terms of timing, if the committee is going to meet next week, it certainly, I think, could wait another week. I mean, we're coming into crunch time, of course, in terms of trying to help staff make decisions around whether or not they would be able to, they would take a leave. So, again, every week we wait, it creates more pressure on, when people do make decisions, having to scramble to try to replace them. But, certainly we could try to get some more information about the number of staff who would potentially take advantage of this, and that could be a possibility. Okay.
I am conflicted, so I'm very curious to hear what the other committee members think.
I'm very sympathetic to the problem we're trying to solve here, which is getting as many staff back as possible. And so I think that that's important. I think also, though, that this is one of those decisions that any decision you make is going to have some people who feel that they've been treated unfairly as a result of that. And One of the criticisms that we have received is that we're making decisions hastily before we've allowed everyone to vent and to express their opinions. This is something which just came up in the past few days. If it's possible to put it off, I'd rather allow people to get to us before we vote than after.
Thank you, Doug. John?
Yeah, full disclosure for me, I saw this on the agenda, and my first thought was, well, we got to add this to the list of 1,000 challenges that this team has had to work through for the last, 5-6 months. And my initial instinct was, well, how do we mitigate the potential for not having enough staff to support, the services that we want to provide, right? So in my head, I'm like, well, this seems, like the obvious option to at least kind of alleviate that pressure. I was surprised, just because I'm putting my private sector hat on. I was surprised at the immediate responses that we received. So I would support just kind of taking an extra week just to kind of digest some of the feedback that's coming in and revisit it at our next meeting. So.
Great, thanks, John. I looked at this as, as a district, we need to have appropriate staff levels to educate all the students in the district. So as a business, we need to do that. But we also look at childcare issues for all working parents. It isn't just teachers, it's all working parents have childcare issues. I remember back in the day when my husband and I had 2 working family, it's one of the hardest things you have to find, and it's one of the most expensive things you have to do. So we can all certainly, understand why this is so conflicting for many people. But I agree with John. As soon as Dr. Sawyer sent out the agenda, I think it's the fastest I've ever seen an email and a call come in about an issue. And I want to make sure that we are listening to all stakeholders and getting everyone's opinions before we make a decision. So I would like to hold off the vote until next week, and that way it'll give the public and staff the ability to reach out, let us know what they're thinking, so that we can have a more informed decision ourselves. Jason, how do you feel about that, putting off the vote for a week?
I have no objections to delaying the vote.
Okay. All right, so why don't we do that? We will push this vote off till our meeting next Wednesday, and that way we'll have more information, and we may have something more from the commissioner before then, and that can help make a better informed decision. Anything further, Dr. Sawyer?
No, thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next on the agenda, it's under Finance and Operations. Mr. Collins, as well as Karen Isaacson, the Director of Extended Learning, are going to talk about revised tuition rates for the Extended School Care Program.
Thank you.
Welcome.
A good segue from my last conversation about childcare to this one. Because like every other aspect of school, extended school care is being impacted by the pandemic. So let's go to the first slide here. I think you have all repeatedly recognized that extended school care provides a critical childcare need to the parents of Shrewsbury. In a normal year, last year, we served 825 students, which is roughly 26% of the K through 6 population used our program. And more would have used it if we had more capacity, because I always run a very big wait list. So, and as we just discussed, the pandemic has created a childcare shortage throughout our state and country. But even just locally, 3 of the preschools who typically take school-age children after school are not allowed by licensing regulations to bring in outsiders. They're limiting their walls. So parents' choices for after school are getting narrower and narrower. Obviously, our model is parent-funded, and so we always desire to run this program in a way that's financially self-sufficient and is not draining school resources. It is, completely parent funds. So from May, when I re-enrolled all of our families and offered spots to people on the wait list, we were at 715 FTE, average kids per day. And as soon as these last Friday came and everyone made their choice, enrollment dropped to 250 FTE. And those 250 are coming 4 days a week, not 5 days a week. So without a significant change to the way we charge tuition and operate ESC, we're looking at a loss of $20,000 per month, which is not sustainable. There is no funds. And as a reminder, we offered pay continuation to ESC employees through May 1st, which then depleted the remaining fund balance. So we're starting this year with nothing. a few, before I get into the details of the budget, a few assumptions. We're only allowing students to attend extended day on the days they are in school. So by default, every parent will be paying 2-day tuition. We had discussed in May of changing I typically ran at a 1 to 10 adult ratio. We set off the school year saying we were going to change to 1 to 13 as a cost saving measure. And this budget exercise assumes minimum staffing required to run this program at a 1 to 13 ratio. The fallout from that is I would have to reduce my before school staff by 12 FTE and reduce my after school staff by 38 FTE. I have about 90 employees total. A lot of them work part-time. So, I mean, we'd be looking anywhere from maybe like 65 employees who would not have work with the program this year just due to low enrollment. And then the remaining staff who would be working would only be working a 4-day work week. So they're already seeing a 20% cut in their hours. We've already taken a wage freeze for all staff and admin. So there's no additional cost in this budget for increases. I made this assumption that our reduced fee level is historically about 8% of our revenue. We subsidize families equivalent to 8% of our revenue. So I made that projection, adjusted it to current enrollment, kept it at 8%. 2 weeks ago, I indicated to families that I will guarantee their re-enrollment when we go back to full capacity, whether that's mid-year, next year. I'm not going to ask anybody to go back on the wait list. I think, so some of you know in person how long our wait list is, and that is, I want them to make the decision that's best for their families, not feel like they have to choose something or they'll lose their childcare next year. So back on the, if you decline the spot right now, I'm going to contact you in the spring to re-register. I'm going to waive our 30-day notice for withdrawal, where we usually ask parents to pay for that 30-day period. I feel like anybody's health can change on a dime, and it does not feel comfortable to me to then be in a position where you're paying for childcare that you don't need. So that's a proposal that's part of this. And then finally in the budget, we, as a cost savings measure, especially during this time where everything's been closed, my full-time administrative assistant has been reassigned to another position. So she still keeps her job for the district, but is not part of this budget. And given the small numbers, I could run this program without an assistant next year. She may have a few hours a week to support me, but so her salary is not counted in this as well. And I've promised I'm taking her back as soon as we open. So monthly budget projection, at just a very high level, you see a revenue of 250 FTE is about $45,000 a month in revenue. All that goes right back out to staff salaries. That covers our staff. It doesn't cover our benefits. It doesn't cover the, we give Selco money for $50,000 each year to defray the cost of the electricity we use to stay open late. Our snack and supply budget, it's $1.10 per child. And honestly, I'm not sure our supply budget will even be that high because we're limited in what we can offer. But that's still a pretty low bare bones. So with that model, with no tuition change, we are losing $20,000 a month. We discussed the possibility, could we combine students from different sites to bring up numbers and spread staffing around it? And I feel that's inadvisable. One thing is we just have limited capacity. Where Floral used to have 120 students, I can't sit 120 students 6 feet apart. We have to reduce each site capacity somewhat. It's gone much further down than I had anticipated. But second, there'd be transportation challenges of trying to get a bus route to pick up children at different schools and bring them. And finally, by keeping them at the site where they go to school all day, it's avoiding that mixing. Now, we're all well aware that students leave us and make other choices and they play soccer and they do things like that. But the more that we can keep students in their spaces, I think is advisable. Regarding the wait list, now, again, back in May, I offered a bunch of spots. There were still 300 people on my wait list. Given, upwards of 40% of elementary school students are choosing remote learning, I can, probably make an assumption 40% of my wait list is not coming to school. Of families choosing hybrid, several have reached out to me to say, we either, our offices are closed till January, we're working from home, we're gonna keep our kids home. Or we really wanna limit our exposure to just, my student's classroom, and we don't necessarily want to come to extended day. I, respect everybody has to make their own decision on that. So when I go to that wait list, I don't really know how many people are still interested for this current school year. Though it is certainly my intention to offer as many spots to our kind of fullest capacity level, to make extended day available to more people, particularly given the closure of some of the other after-school programs. So within keeping that safe distance, I will offer more spots. This slide is the local rate comparison I showed you last spring. These are last year's rates and where extended day fell in that list. We are significantly below market value, and we've been able to make that work for so long just because of the scale of our program and the fact that it's, 700 plus students and has 12-month programming. To make it work for this current year, we'd be looking at an increase of 60% over the 2019 rate. So last year we were charging $114 per month for after school. You approved a 7% increase for this year, which would have brought it to $122. To make the math work on this, at a break-even, no buffer budget, fees would have to go to $182 per month for after school and $83 a month before school. So, that's a big ask. It's a big hit. I know that's a $60 increase per child for after school. And I can't predict. Now, families who are at home those other 3 days and not paying for childcare, well, they just saw their bill go down from $306 per month to $182 per month. But families who are forced to find other childcare options at a higher price are bearing the burden in multiple ways, because I don't have a 5-day option for them. Part of this proposal is saying parents who qualify for free and reduced lunch will hold the rate that was already approved for this year. They will not get the 60% increase. So what that amounts to is, 80% of $56 a month for before school would be $11 a month if you get free lunch. It would be $22 a month if you get reduced lunch. Similarly, after school, $24.48 a month. So that is based on that middle column, that we will honor the 60-80 split for that middle column and not increase their rates. We really want to make it as affordable as we can. So when I update that rate comparison, and I do want to point out that everything other than the yellow line is still the 1920 tuition rates. I didn't have enough time to kind of update those needs. Most programs do increase their fees annually by some small amount. So you'll see even with this 60% increase, it bumps us up, but it's not at the top. I have a full list of about 40 programs, and I kind of, I picked some that were most comparable to ours and to give you a real scope of where other people sit. So even with a huge increase, I feel like this is still well within market value. It's not pricing us out of the market. And, to reiterate some of the points of why we need such a big increase, we saw a 65% enrollment drop. We are only collecting tuition 4 days a week. But fixed costs such as employee benefits, which is a big one, that doesn't go down just because they're working fewer hours. Their cost of benefits holds. The cost to Selco holds. Typically, we're charging every family a $20 registration fee, which could be $11,000 or $12,000 a year of just, kind of that buffer money. At least $8,000 of that we wouldn't collect this year because we have so fewer families coming. Running the summer enrichment program. Now, the enrichment dollars are a separate account, but the extended day portion of enrichment plus the vacation week programming I run, that can generate about $50,000 of profit beyond our expenses. So that really helps. This whole 12-month shift helps carry our very low market rates. Without that, we're not anticipating running any vacation programs this year. I cannot even think about summer of 2021 at this point, but knowing because we didn't have summer of 2020, there's nothing in that account. We're starting at zero. I have additional concerns about the tightness of this budget. I think there will still be additional students withdrawing even without a rate increase as parents are making their choices around, right, I know I'm hybrid, but what does my family situation look like? Maybe I'm hiring somebody to help with remote learning on the other days and they're going to do after school. I think I'm going to continue to see withdrawals. I I don't know if there's going to be a greater percentage of families qualifying for reduced fee. I mean, I offered a lot of spots to families on the wait list, and I don't yet know what their lunch status is. I also don't know if families have lost income because of COVID, it's going to put them into a category that qualifies them for more assistance. So I think we could see a bigger chunk of subsidy. I don't know for sure if I'm going to need additional one-to-one support. This budget assumes the students who right now say they're returning, who have had support in the past, with a kind of an estimate of like, oh, you know, thrown another for good measure. But there still may be students on this wait list or who I've already enrolled who have not identified as needing additional adult support. And salary, as you see, is our biggest driver. This model, as I said, also assumes just minimal staffing to operate. I'm a little concerned about a program that has maybe 22 students and 2 adults. Well, that's 1 to 11. That's not bad, but we're not allowing parents into the building. One person's really going to be stationed at the door doing a lot of that drop-off pickup. It makes it a little tight on the like, okay, what are we able to offer when there's only 2 adults in the building. So, this is part of my effort to say, great, how wide can I expand this? Who on the wait list is interested? I can put out a general call to the community if the wait list doesn't fill it. Because I'd be much more comfortable saying there are 3 adults per site so that one can really be engaged in parent interaction or a student challenge, behavior problem, health problem, and still have 2 other adults who are running this. But I really wanted to give you the model of this is a minimum need to operate. Enrollment as it stood as of this morning, this is how many students per day I'm anticipating and how many staff I would need to meet those needs. At Beale, we always run at a lower, fewer students per adult. 12 to 2 is still a great ratio, but I'm not going to have one person work alone. We would absolutely have to have 2. But it's tight, and this does not count the child-specific aides. This just counts the core staff. So this was the updated monthly projection. If a 60% budget increase is approved, given all the assumptions we've discussed, you'll see it is just squeaking above the break-even level. I see, as a committee, we really have 2 options, and one option is to approve an increase of 60%, and the other option is to suspend our operations until we're able to return to a full enrollment. I'm, really hoping and recommending that we can put it out there to parents at a higher rate and see who is able to still enroll. And if we have sufficient interest of people willing to pay that rate, we open and operate, in whatever capacity we can, serving as many students we're able to serve. So again, it's increasing 60% for full fee families, but holding reduced fee to our originally approved rates for this year. And this is with the assumption that when we do go back to 5-day capacity, I don't need a 60% rate increase. We will reevaluate what our rates should be based on enrollment and finances at that time. But this is a short-term measure to get us through a crisis situation without completely shutting off this childcare option for families. Questions?
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Jason, I think you're with us for 2 more minutes. I know you have
I am. It's just a brief comment, and I apologize because I do need to leave the call in a minute. Obviously, this is an incredibly distressing situation. I want to thank Ms. Isaacson for her work. This is something that I personally am going to need to think long and hard about, because this is obviously, on the one hand, a necessity, but it's just a really stark representation of the incredible impact that this pandemic is having on our programming. This is just a really stark representation of the challenges we face.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have any further comments or questions? Lindsay?
This is so hard. I'm a parent who just got a child off the wait list, and I'm now trying to figure out what does before school even look like in a remote world and all of this. And so, and yet I think some of the emails that we received about the issue of childcare really were telling us that the community is desperate for childcare, and so what we can do and what we can provide. is really important. I, like Jason, want to sort of sit on this. I'm sure the community will have some feelings about this, and it's so hard to know because parents are often forced to play some of the waitlist game, not through any fault of anybody's, but between other providers and what they have available. And so for you to know, given the numbers of who's still enrolled, how many more might come in, do you feel like you have a sense of a capacity limit that you might hit though because of building space or physical distancing, or could we really only enroll another 30 young people, or that if we had a high uptick, what that might look like? Or are you concerned you're already kind of near that, given that narrow margin of staffing you're talking about?
Right.
Doesn't seem like it leaves you much room in many places.
In addressing physical capacity, there is room to go up of accepting people off the wait list. I mean, I think I'm still working right now in my some of my responsibilities are working with principals on reopening. So we're still counting chairs in cafeterias and how many individual seats can we get for lunch. And both the cafeteria and the gyms are going to be set up as permanent eating locations. So Extended Day is going to have to work around that. We're not going to have a gym to play in. We're going to have fixed seating. It's really going to limit what we can offer. I have so much faith in the creativity and talent of my team that they're going to make it as fun as possible. But there's still, you're not playing a board game. You're not sharing these touched materials. We're not playing pickup basketball games at Sherwood. But as I'm counting number of desks, that's going to help me sort of determine exactly what that capacity is. I know it's greater than what I currently have. I have to balance this reality of if I took 100 people off my wait list and then we reopen and everybody comes back, am I 100 people over capacity? And I mean, I think it's something I've talked about with Mr. Collins of that, well, if we get to that situation, then we work with each building saying, okay, can we take over a little bit additional space somewhere this year? Is there a compromise? We don't typically use classrooms, maybe, so that we're not going to kick out the people we just offered the spot to. I think I would assume some risk of new people coming in are not going to take the spot of the people who deferred this year, but that's definitely some risk of juggling that act. If we, assuming it, a rate goes up, we get enough people to say, yep, I'm in, we're doing it, and then things change and people start to withdraw, and then we're going to have to pull the plug after it's opened. I think that's a considerable risk too of saying we're offering you childcare and then nope, we can't make it work is not a position I want to be in. I would like to go in with some confidence, though at the same time we know if public health shifts and schools close, we close with it. I would very much like to say we have a program that can remain open as long as schools are in person, we are in person, and we can build capacity back up. But there's certainly a concern of capacity going down mid-year.
Thank you.
Anybody else, John?
I appreciate the report you provided and the context you provide with regards to the why, like why we
Right.
have to, look at this. It is a critical need right now. I think it's really important, but it is hard to sustain a service when you're losing 20,000 a month, right? So I would like to hear from the public, especially those that are very much impacted by this, and that this is very much a need for them. So I'd be very curious to hear feedback from the public. Yep.
Thank you, because I think this is such a critical need. Pre-COVID, COVID, childcare has always been an issue. This is a wonderful program, but then we have to make sure that it's a self-funded program, and that's difficult. So, raising it is not optimal, but if it continues the program, I personally think that's what I would hope parents will be able to do, and we would work with them for it. But it gives us some time, and like John said, Lindsay, we want to hear from the public.
Yeah,
What are parents thinking about this as they move forward? But I think it's such a critical need that I'm glad we're exploring it and not just saying no. We're going to wait until we're 100% open and schools are back.
Right.
Mr. Collins.
Yes, Mrs. Fritz, thank you. I just want to make a couple of comments. One is, like you, I just appreciate the work Mrs. Isaacson has done to try to provide a continuation of services for a critical need. Again, this is a so-called auxiliary program, which means, I think that, it's not the mainstay of our educational services, but it does provide a critical need for so many families and is self-sustaining, does not take any tax dollars on an annual basis. All the fees pay for all of the costs. That's been the model. And that's what this model is predicated upon in terms of the price increase. And, part of our discussions were, how can we continue to provide this in this environment to those families that need it? We know that our rates have been significantly below market for a number of reasons, economies of scale, and also the fact that because we're using public buildings, while there are some costs for electricity, other types of costs a business would bear aren't part of this. Snow plowing, groundskeeping, other overhead costs are just not part. So you're able to provide a below-market rate. So this price increase is really more reflective of a market price. And at the same time, what she's offered up in terms of this recommendation is to not harm those families who are in most critical financial need by holding steady and having a 0% increase for families who are eligible for free or reduced lunch. So it kind of serves both ends of the spectrum, if you will, and trying to, thread that needle. And I think, the last piece that I do want to mention that is clearly true here going forward is that implicit in this whole plan is a workforce reduction. We're just not able to sustain all of the employees that we have had in the past, and so we are facing a workforce reduction for this group of employees. We're also trying to do what we can with Human Resources and Mrs. Isaacson to try to work towards offering some of those employees other employment for other new needs that are COVID-related and could be COVID grant funded. So that's another part of this equation, but I didn't want that left, unspoken or not talked about, because that is implicit in this whole plan is a significant workforce reduction, which is unfortunate. But anyway, I just want to highlight a couple of things or reinforce a couple of things to, as you said, it would be pretty easy just to say, just shelve this whole thing. Wait for a vaccine and then we'll come back. But then you ignore the fact that we still have 250 children who, about that amount of families who are looking for a critical need. And that's what we're trying to do is salvage this thing and serve that need. So I certainly support her recommendation.
I want to clarify, I'm glad you said this out loud, because it's not 200 families, it's 500 families, but we're only serving 250 a day. So 500 families would be impacted by this. And in terms of workforce reduction, one of my big concerns, particularly around, each program has a site coordinator and, several full-time employees, benefits eligible employees who've been with us a very long time. My concern of shutting down is if those people are forced to go take other jobs and then we reopen, I'm starting from scratch and losing fantastic people. I don't want to lose a single of my 90 employees, but I know some of them have more flexibility. They have other jobs. They would hopefully come back to me. But I really do not want to risk losing the people, the leaders of this program in particular, who I will need to be able to be there on a dime when we reopen. So, we're working on some short-term and long-term solutions for scenarios, but again, we can't make up a job for somebody if the job doesn't exist. And so, there are some COVID-related things, but that's another critical piece of this for my hope to keep this open. Remaining open puts us in a better position to reopen at full capacity in terms of preserving some of our staff.
Thank you. Dr. Sori, any comments?
Just to reiterate what Ms. Isaacson and Mr. Collins just discussed, I also support the recommendation. I would suggest those watching, families who are affected in particular, if you want to share your feedback with the school committee and myself. The school committee's email address is on the website. It's schoolcommittee@shrewsbury.ka12.ma.us. It is, first, I want to thank Ms. Isaacson for her work on this, and also, and Mr. Collins may have mentioned it, but during this time where we're not doing the typical preparations for her program opening because of the delay of school, she has been working to support a variety of reopening operations, and she's been invaluable in that work, and her her work ethic and her skill and her thoughtfulness are deeply appreciated as we continue to manage this crisis. I am disheartened that under any of these circumstances, we're going to have excellent employees who are going to lose their job. I was proud that the school committee continued to fund their compensation last spring during the emergency. Everyone's hope at the time, of course, was that we would be coming out hopefully into more of a normal situation in this coming school year in terms of being able to support the program. But unfortunately, that is not the case, given that we're in a hybrid model for all the reasons Ms. Isaacson stated. And I just wanted to publicly thank those employees and apologize for the circumstances that will not allow us to continue to employ them in the coming year. And I do hope at some point they're able to come back. At the same time, and I think it's going to be very important, I would ask Ms. Isaacson when she communicates with those employees, we are also posting for positions for instructional aid positions. We're posting for bus monitors. There's a variety of positions that we may be able to transition folks into. Sometimes it's because they're a college student, they're part-time, and it just fits their schedule. But in other cases, my hope is that we can find other opportunities for those employees. But one of the worst parts of going through any kind of budget crisis is when excellent people lose their job, and it's something that is deeply concerning. And my hope is that we'll be able to again move through this, maintain the program to the extent we can with an increased fee, which we don't take lightly. But I do think, for all the reasons stated, trying to maintain it in this fashion, it will make a big difference for many families, and position us for that when we are reopening more fully, that we can get back into business very quickly. So. Those are my comments around the topic.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. So we will take this under consideration, ask for feedback from the public, and put it to a vote at our meeting next week. Thank you again. Okay, we do not have our minutes from the August 6th meeting. We will get them for our meeting next week. And we do need to go into executive session this evening for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant and aid requirements. Purpose 7, Open Meeting Law, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, 22FG, for the purpose of reviewing, approving, and/or releasing executive session minutes. In B, for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect of the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. Purpose 3, the Shrewsbury Education Association Unit A, Shrewsbury Education Association Unit B, the Shrewsbury Paraprofessional Association, and/or the Shrewsbury Cafeteria Workers, where deliberation in an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body, and will return to open session only for the purpose of adjourning for the evening. May I have a motion that we adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote is required. Lindsay?
Aye.
Dale?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Thank you and good night.